Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are so genuinely glad you're here joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.
When you walk into a car dealership today and those glossy marketing brochures are just practically screaming at you?
Oh, absolutely. They're designed to do exactly that.
Right. They hand you this beautiful pamphlet for a brand new electric vehicle, and it's all about the massive
The
numbers.
big flashy stats.
Exactly, like 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. 200, 300, 400 horsepower. And it's presented to you as this absolute unwavering fact.
Right, like it's a guarantee.
Yeah, you assume, hey, I buy a car with 300 horsepower, I get 300 horsepower. But it turns out that brochure is actually telling you only half the story.
Very true. There's a lot hiding just beneath the surface.
So for today's deep dive, our mission is to uncover the secret double life of electric motors. We're going to break down this topic in a really simple, engaging way for you.
It's a fascinating topic, honestly.
It really is, because the other half of that story involves these hidden numbers, extreme heat, and this crazy engineering battle just to keep your car moving safely on the highway.
Yeah, the heat is a huge factor that most drivers never even think about.
Exactly. And to figure this out, we've brought in a really great stack of sources today. We've got a detailed breakdown of EV powertrains called Paradox, a really stark performance analysis on electric versus internal combustion engines called Performance, and surprisingly, a technical guide on e-bike motors from Bictrix.
That e-bike source is actually going to be crucial later on.
Oh, I bet. So, okay, let's unpack this, because by the end of this deep dive, you are going to have the ultimate insider's guide to decoding EV performance numbers, so you never get tripped by that marketing hype on your next road trip.
Which is so important because it's a massive shift in how we need to think about vehicle performance entirely.
Right.
Like, you test drive a car around the block, it throws you back in your seat at a green light, and you naturally expect it to be the exact same car when you're, say, 3 hours into a summer road trip.
But it's not.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The physics of electricity have a very different plan.
So we need to look under the hood and really decode what's going on here, because looking at the performance source, there is a fundamental difference between the two types of power listed for these vehicles.
Right, peak power versus nominal power.
Yeah, peak and nominal. And these two numbers paint completely different pictures. Let's start with peak power, which is that flashy number printed in bold on the brochure.
Well, peak power is the absolute maximum effort the electric motor can produce. It's the sprint.
Okay.
But the crucial caveat, the part they totally leave out of the sales pitch, is that it can only produce that maximum effort for a very, very limited time.
Wait, really? Like, how limited?
Extremely limited. Think of it as just a sudden burst of energy to get you off the line quickly or, to make a rapid pass in city traffic. It is inherently unsustainable.
Wow. Okay, so just to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this, is peak power basically like sprinting to catch a bus, while nominal power is your sustainable jogging pace for a 5K?
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it, yeah.
Okay, good.
When you sprint for the bus, your body is producing peak output. You're moving fast, but your heart rate spikes, lactic acid builds up, your core temperature rises.
Right, you get exhausted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You physically cannot maintain that sprint for 3 miles. You have to slow down to a jog, your nominal pace, so your body's natural cooling systems can actually keep up.
Okay, that makes total sense.
And in an EV, that physical exertion translates directly into heat. The motor, the inverter, the battery, they all start to overheat.
Right, heat is the enemy here.
But, this drives me a bit crazy. If you know a human can only sprint for 10 seconds, you don't enter them in a marathon and advertise their sprint speed as their marathon pace, right?
You really shouldn't know.
So why are automakers allowed to highlight only the sprint speed when most drivers taking a road trip are going to spend hours at a jogging pace? What's fascinating here is that we basically have a century of conditioning from internal combustion engines to blame for that.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, in a traditional gas or diesel car, the stated maximum horsepower on the brochure is, generally speaking, what the engine can maintain continuously on the highway.
Wait, continuously?
Yeah. An internal combustion engine is literally designed around containing continuous explosions. Its entire cooling system, the massive radiator, the coolant loops, it's built from the ground up to handle a continuous maximum thermal load.
Oh, wow. I never really thought about it that way.
Right, so if a gas car says it has 150 horsepower, you can theoretically take it to the Autobahn and run it near that limit for hours.
Assuming you don't run out of gas, obviously.
Exactly. But in an EV, that continuous highway power is actually the much lower nominal number. The rules of thermodynamics completely changed, but the marketing language just carried over from the old terminology.
That is wild. So that nominal power, the continuous jogging pace, is actually tested and regulated, right? Like the ECE R85 30-minute norm.
Yes, exactly. They put the vehicle under a continuous load for 30 straight minutes to find its true thermal limit.
Okay, so this gap between peak and nominal isn't just an automotive marketing trick. It's the harsh physical reality of electric motors.
It's pure physics.
And to understand the why behind those physics, let's look at the big trick source and scale all the way down from a 2-ton car to a bicycle.
The e-bike microcosm is such a brilliant way to look at this.
Right, because it isolates the exact same physics. So how do these e-bike motors actually operate under pressure?
Well, in an e-bike, just like in a high-end EV, you have a controller acting as the brain.
Right.
And this controller is constantly, like by the millisecond, calculating your speed, your velocity, and the torque demand.
Okay.
So when you hit a steep hill and pedal hard, the controller allows the motor to hit its peak wattage for an incredibly short burst, sometimes just a fraction of a second.
Wait, hold on. If the motor can hit that peak wattage, why not just let it run at that level to get up a massive hill? Like, why throttle my power when I need it the most?
Because doing so makes the electrical coils far too hot.
Oh, the heat again.
Yeah, an electric motor creates motion by running electrical current through tightly wound copper coils. When you push maximum current through them, they experience electrical resistance.
And resistance creates heat.
Rapidly. If the controller lets you run at peak wattage all the way up that hill, the enamel insulation wrapped around those copper coils would literally melt off.
Oh, wow. That sounds catastrophic.
It is. The motor would short circuit and destroy itself in seconds, so the motor must artificially throttle down.
To protect itself.
Exactly. And it actually throttles down to less than the nominal output to give the coils time to cool to a safe operating level.
That is fascinating. But if peak wattage is basically dangerous to sustain, why even list it on an e-bike spec sheet?
It's mostly listed as an industry standard because DIYers and project developers need it for advanced level custom builds. They need to know the absolute thermal limits to design their fuses.
Right, but for the average user.
For the average user, it is a dangerous metric to rely on for continuous power. It will leave you very disappointed on a long hill.
Okay, so let's scale this back up to the cars. If a tiny e-bike motor has to throttle down just to protect its coils from melting, the thermal stress on an electric car pushing highway speeds must be massive.
Oh, it's monumental. Pushing a heavy vehicle through the air at 80 miles per hour requires relentless, constant energy.
Which brings us to what actually happens when you take an EV on a road trip. Let's unpack these stark realities from the performance source.
Yeah, the data paints a very clear picture of two completely different driving experiences.
Right, because in the city, your EV uses peak power constantly, right? It's incredibly agile, you get instant torque at stoplights, and it doesn't overheat.
Exactly, because in stop-and-go traffic, the motor has plenty of time to cool down while you're waiting at the red light.
But then you merge onto the highway. You set the cruise control to 130 kilometers per hour. And after just a few kilometers, the electronics realize the thermal limit is approaching, and they artificially clamp down on the power to stabilize at the nominal rating.
They have to prevent thermal damage.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I'm going to read some of the comparisons from the source data because it blew my mind.
Go for it.
A Citroën EC3 drops from 113 CV peak to just 45 CV continuous, meaning on the highway, it performs essentially like an old 54 CV Fiat Panda 1.1 Fire.
It's a huge drop.
And it gets crazier. A Dacia Spring drops from 65 to 24 CV, which is literally like a Ligi microcar. And a Peugeot E208 drops from 156 down to 78 CV.
Half its power, gone.
Right, so if my brand new EV suddenly turns into a microcar on the highway with barely any passing power left,
Yeah.
how does anyone safely take a road trip?
Well, there is some nuance here we should clarify. Your top speed is still reachable.
Okay, so I won't just suddenly slow down on the interstate?
No. Once you are at 80 miles per hour, it only takes a fraction of your power to maintain that speed against wind resistance, so you can hold your speed.
Got it.
But what is almost entirely gone is your reserve power. So if you suddenly need to accelerate or pass a truck on an incline, the car has no extra power to give you without overheating.
Wow. So acceleration becomes totally sluggish.
Exactly. However, high-end efficiency changes the game entirely.
Right, like the Tesla Model 3 RWD. The source notes it drops from 283 CV to 120 CV.
Which acts roughly like a Ford Focus 1.5 TDCi on the highway.
So even though it's dropping, 120 CV is still a much higher baseline of continuous power.
Precisely. It proves that advanced thermal management can retain enough baseline power to keep the car feeling responsive, even under heavy stress.
So it all comes down to heat management. If heat kills highway performance, who is actually building cars that solve this problem?
Well, looking at the paradox source, we can outline the gold standards of EV engineering. It's
Hmm.
all based on a well-made powertrain and superior thermal management.
Okay, let's break that down by segment. In segment A, the compact cars, the Fiat 500e, has a perfectly balanced liquid cooling system preventing those drastic drops.
Liquid cooling is absolutely essential.
And the Honda eNY1 uses a platform designed specifically for thermal stability over instant thrust.
Right, they tuned it for consistency rather than just sprinting.
Then moving to segment B, the MG4 extended range features an oversized thermal system to avoid significant highway cuts.
A great brute force solution, having a massive thermal buffer.
And the Volvo EX30 uses refined Geely architecture. But the real heavy hitters are in segment C, right?
Oh, without a doubt. The Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6.
Right, because they use an 800-volt architecture. And that generates drastically less heat at high speeds.
It's a game changer for thermal limits.
So let me try an analogy here. Is the 800-volt system in the Hyundai and Kia, is that essentially like upgrading your home's plumbing to a wider pipe, allowing you to move the same amount of water pressure but with way less friction and stress on the system?
I completely agree with that analogy, yes. By doubling the voltage, you cut the current in half. And the current is what generates the friction or the heat in the wires.
So it stays cooler naturally.
Exactly. And of course, the Tesla Model 3 RWD remains the absolute benchmark in this segment due to its inverter's heat management and brilliant software logic.
Right. So synthesizing all of this, you're saying there are basically three key pillars of a reliable EV.
Yes. First, active liquid thermal management, keeping the battery and motor in the ideal temperature range.
Check.
Second, native modern electric platforms, meaning cars designed from the ground up to be electric, not just adapted from old gas cars.
Right, they need the airflow.
And third, the presence of a heat pump. This is vital to drastically optimize energy and reduce thermal stress during long trips.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? Well, if you were just commuting in the city, picking up groceries, peak power marketing is honestly perfectly fine for your needs.
You'll love the instant torque and you'll never hit the thermal limits.
But if you plan to drive on the highway, you now know the secret. You have to look past the marketing.
Don't be dazzled by the sprint speed.
Exactly. Demand to know the nominal power, seek out those 800-volt architectures, and make sure the car has a heat pump. You are now armed with the actual physics of car shopping.
And, leaving you with a broader thought here. If electric vehicle performance is this incredibly sensitive to temperature and thermal limits today,
Yeah.
how will rising global temperatures and extreme summer heat waves fundamentally alter how automotive engineers have to design these cooling systems in the next decade?
Oh, wow. That is a massive question to ponder. The climate itself dictating the engineering.
The thermal headroom is shrinking every year.
Well, that gives us all a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We deeply appreciate your time and curiosity as we explored all of this.
Yes, thank you for listening.
Keep asking the right questions, and we'll see you on the next one.